Welcome back, everyone, to Fragomen FC, Passport to North America 2026. And we're just a few short months away from the World Cup in 2026, and it's flying by. So if you're trying to get to the U.S. for the World Cup in 2026, your biggest opponent might not be the other team, but it might be the calendar. Today, we're going to talk about ESTA, B visas for fans, visas for media and staff, the ongoing travel ban, and the very real topic of visa bonds, including how you might get your money back. The headline is this: plan early, know what is required, and do not assume a ticket, credential, or an ESTA approval is going to guarantee you entry into the United States. Today, we've got a very special guest, Brian Simmons, who's a senior manager in Fragomen's U.S. Consular practice and is a key part of our consular knowledge and government liaison team. Brian coordinates outreach to consular managers at U.S. embassies and consulates worldwide and helps clients navigate the real-world logistics, especially when things get super complicated. Brian is the one that we all refer to when things get super complicated. Brian spent more than 17 years as a U.S. State Department Foreign Service officer, holding consular management roles across multiple countries, plus Washington, D.C. Brian, welcome to Fragomen FC.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Happy to join you today.
And just before we start, just a quick note to our viewers and listeners. This episode is for general information. It's not legal advice, and rules can change very fast. So always check the latest guidance, talk to your immigration counsel for specific facts, and on we go.
Well said, Rick. And Brian, it's a pleasure having you here. Thank you for joining. So please do set the stage for us. The 2026 World Cup, it's arriving quite soon, and U.S. immigration and security policy, it's evolving rapidly. What should attendees understand on a first basis terms?
Thanks, Sergio. Look, as both you and Rick just alluded to, I think the most important sort of bottom line advice we can give to anybody in 2026 is assume nothing. Okay, visa rules and procedures are changing right now at a pace that I haven't seen in 25 years of working in this industry, both inside the government and out of it. So whether we're talking about travel bans, visa interview waiver changes, home country application requirements, social media reviews, visa bonds, treatment of previous arrests, all of these various things indicate that like routine visa applications are becoming a thing of the past. And so, as you both have mentioned, the most important things that you can do are start early, use every programmatic and systemic advantage that the programming tools give you, and come well documented and pay attention to what's going on in the world with respect to visas, because what's in place today may not be there tomorrow. And so really, there's never been a time like this where people need to be paying attention quite so closely to U.S. visa policies.
So for fans, when does the ESTA cover World Cup travel, Brian?
Well, ESTA can be used for just about any sort of leisure travel to the United States, including business and other just vacation purposes. And it can be used at any time during the validity period of the ESTA approval, which is typically 2 years. The admission under ESTA, however, is limited to 90 days. So even if you're fortunate enough to have tickets to the opening match and the final match, that 90-day period should cover you just fine, so long as you don't enter more than a month in advance or stay more than a month beyond the final match for the celebrations. So as long as you stay within that 90-day range, you should be perfectly covered for any match or combination of matches that are going to take place in the World Cup.
And in your opinion, and provide some insight into the most common misunderstanding people might have with regard to the ESTA.
Sure. So unlike the visa, like when you get a visa, it's a paper document and it's kind of a dead document, right? It's there, it's concrete, the details are fixed on the document itself. Unlike the visa, the ESTA is principally an electronic document. And as a result, it's considered to be sort of reactive to personal changes. And so if somebody got an ESTA very recently, they're probably fine. But if they got their ESTA approval a year or more ago, they may need to go back and revisit or reapply for that ESTA if there have been any significant changes in their personal circumstances. So, like if they have a new passport, if they've acquired a new citizenship, if they've traveled to one of the countries that are asked about in the application, like Iran or Cuba or Syria, they may need to go back and do a new application or update their application so that they're able to utilize the ESTA in coming over. So I guess the main misunderstanding is that ESTA is a living travel document, and it is responsive to your personal circumstance changes.
Brian, you alluded to this at the top of the podcast here, that things are changing so rapidly, and it's important to stay up to date with everything in the U.S. visa landscape. If someone does need a B visa to enter the U.S. for the World Cup, what is one or two unchanged realities that they should be aware of with that type of visa?
Good one. There are actually a few sort of bedrock principles people can count on. Um, Number one, I think probably the most important message to convey to the audience for this podcast is having a ticket to the World Cup in hand does not guarantee issuance of a visa. To a lesser extent, having a visa in hand doesn't guarantee admission to the United States, but let's focus on the visas principally. Every applicant still has to show that they're eligible for the visa. And that means showing that you have strong ties to your home country, sufficient funds for the duration of your travel, insurance to cover your any accidents that might happen in the United States, family back home, strong ties to the country, other personal connections that make it less likely that an individual is going to remain in the United States. That remains sort of the foundational bedrock of the B1 B2 visitor visa, is that applicants have to overcome what's known as the presumption of immigrant intent, and no number of tickets to the FIFA World Cup are going to overcome that by themselves. That provides a valid reason for travel, of course, but it doesn't excuse anybody from all of those other requirements. I guess the only other sort of unchanged reality is that of all the visa categories scheduled around the world, the one that's usually the most likely to have the longest wait times are for B1, B2 visa appointments. So if you're seeking an appointment for a first-time visa in Bogota, it's going to be very difficult. In Mexico as well, it may be difficult. And there are a number of other locations around the world where B1, B2 visas historically and today have the longest wait times. And so for people in a lot of those locations, if they haven't already got an appointment scheduled or a visa in hand, it's going to be rather challenging. And they will have to utilize things like FIFA Pass or emergency appointment requests and things that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Thanks, Brian. So you are discussing different jurisdictions and the different wait times in obtaining the visa to come to the U.S. As we're all aware, there is a conflict in the Middle East right now that is impacting a handful of countries, where we have seen that U.S. consular services have been suspended in a lot of these countries. If you're a fan from one of these countries and you don't yet have a visa to enter the U.S., what is your advice to these fans?
That's a good question. As you know, or at least as I alluded to a few minutes ago, one of the big changes that we saw last year was a dramatic shrinking of one's visa application possibilities. In that there's no longer carte blanche to sort of apply wherever you want to or wherever's most convenient or cheapest to get to, et cetera. Now, under State Department rules, applicants are expected to apply in their own home countries. And so, in recognition of the closure of these various embassies and consulates throughout the Middle East, it is our understanding now from contacts in the State Department that the department is working on a policy to ameliorate that sort of restriction, okay, and those closures. We don't know yet exactly what that's going to look like. It could take the form of either designating specific locations where people can go and apply, like somebody who can't apply in Abu Dhabi is able to apply in Cairo or in Athens or whatever. Or it may take the form of more global policy to say that individuals impacted by these closures are not subject to those geographical restrictions that were put in place last September.
And Brian, what can you explain the numbers of entries that are allowed on visas? So I know that some visas, for instance, you might have multiple entries. It might be valid for a certain number of years, whereas sometimes you see one entry visas. How would that impact a fan who has a one entry visa to the United States, who is going to see a match in the US, then they're going to go watch their team play in Canada, and then they're going to come back to the US to watch the third match, but they only have that single entry visa?
Yeah, I mean, look, of all the policies that changed last year, I think the one that really took me the most by surprise, speaking honestly here, was the dramatic change to visa reciprocity in a lot of different countries. So we saw dozens of countries where the visa reciprocity limits dropped to single entry 3 months, right? And so you only get one chance to enter the US, and that's it. Once you leave the US, you have to get a new visa to come again. And the 3 month limitation as well. Like for many individuals, if they were lucky enough to apply for their B1 B2 visa in January and they got a visa that was valid for 3 months, they're not going to be able to get here before it expires, right? So it dramatically restricts sort of the strategies and timing of individuals coming from one of these affected countries. Now, important note here: this is actually not very well known. So those listeners who were fortunate enough to tune in are going to get the inside scoop. And that is that consular officers are empowered to issue a visa for two admissions, even in a location where the maximum defined by the reciprocity tables is single entry. The rationale behind this sort of flexibility for consular officers is that you don't want to give somebody a visa that permits them to enter the United States en route to another location, but then it cuts off their ability to return home. So if you're on your way to Mexico and you enter through New York and you've used your one entry, well, all of a sudden you don't have a route to get home from Mexico because you can't enter the US again. And so, in order to address those sort of logistical challenges, officers have the ability to issue for two entries on the same trip. So, if someone is issued a two entry visa, that will be valid for the duration of their travel for the World Cup. If they return home without utilizing that second entry, it doesn't matter. It can't be used on a subsequent trip. So keep that in mind. Anybody from one of these countries, if you get that two entry visa and you enter the US for the World Cup, but don't utilize it to go to Canada or Mexico, you're not going to be able to just pull it out again in the future and reuse it. That trip will have been used up. Oh, sorry, I do want to mention it is important and it is incumbent upon the applicant to ask for the two entries. Officers may not default to giving you the two just because they see that you're going to the World Cup. They may not have any idea that there are matches being played in Canada or Mexico. They may not know that you have tickets to a match in Canada or Mexico. You must ask the officer for the two entries. If you don't know whether your country is one of those that has that restriction, you can look it up online, of course, but if you appear at your interview and you don't know, ask anyway. The worst the officer can say is, "Don't worry about it. I'm going to issue you a multiple 10-year visa." Great. But in any event, they're not going to assume that you need the two entries unless you specifically request it.
Wow, that's a great tip, Brian, and very useful for our viewers and people that are coming to the World Cup. So thank you very much for that. And now, if it's okay with you, let's talk FIFA Pass. It's everywhere. Could you tell us what does it mean in plain terms? What does it do? What does it doesn't?
Well, I can't promise plain terms, Sergio, but let's talk about it for a few minutes. I do have quite a bit to say about this one, so settle in, get a drink, and let's dive into it. So FIFA Pass works sort of like a front of the line ticket, right? Anybody who's been to Disney World has the option to buy the Express Pass or whatever to cut the line. That's what the FIFA Pass is intended to do. That is to say, if you have a ticket, you can schedule, without the significant wait times. So let's talk about what it means and sort of what are some of the important points to remember. So the system is available only to individuals who have purchased a ticket to the World Cup through the official FIFA site. Once you've done that, the site will make available an option to utilize the FIFA Pass in order to schedule your visa appointment. If you buy your FIFA ticket from somebody online or from a friend, or your boss gives you a ticket to the World Cup, that's probably not going to allow you to utilize this option to get an advantageous B1, B2 appointment. Okay, so a couple of other things to remember about this. Number one, similar to what I mentioned at the outset of this call, using the portal does not guarantee issuance of a visa, and it does not provide any workaround or exemptions from any of the normal eligibility requirements for the visa. It simply allows you to see the calendar with better availability than most individuals are able to use. You still have to provide ties to your home country, whether that's work, home, family, social obligations, etc. Number two, portal use, the use of the FIFA Pass portal is limited to scheduling for B1, B2 visa appointments. That's it. You can't use it for work visas. You can't use it to schedule student visas. So if you're in a location that has a really hard calendar for H-1B visas, for example, you know who you are if you're listening to this. You cannot use the FIFA Pass portal to schedule an H-1B appointment. The consulate will not accept that appointment, okay? It can only be used for B1, B2. Third, the site cannot guarantee an appointment spot prior to the intended travel date or prior to the commencement of the World Cup. Each location, each consulate has been instructed to reserve as many appointments as their workload will allow in order to prioritize them for FIFA Pass scheduling. But there are only so many spaces that each consulate can make available based on their capacity, based on already scheduled workload, etc. And so even if you use FIFA Pass, if you're from a very heavily subscribed country like Colombia or Mexico or Brazil and some others, if you're from a very heavily subscribed country, you may still have difficulty getting an appointment within the period that you need it. And finally, scheduling with the FIFA Pass doesn't get you around any of the other existing visa restrictions. Any of the 39 countries on the travel ban lists. It doesn't do anything to help with the validity period of the visas. It doesn't help you get around the bond requirements. It merely helps with the scheduling itself, but all of the other restrictions remain in place. Okay, so I think those are sort of the most important takeaways that we can give with respect to the FIFA Pass portal. I know it sounds like a lot of bad news, a lot of restrictions, but in fact, it really is a valuable service, and hopefully a lot of people are able to utilize it.
So Brian, who should be most concerned about being unable to attend the World Cup coming up in a few months?
Well, I guess it depends on your perspective, right? It depends on your perspective. First, let's mention the countries on travel ban lists, right? So there are currently 39 countries that are included on either the full or partial list of travel ban countries list. I'm not going to list all 39 of them right now, but hopefully we'll have a link in the podcast back to Fragomen's site that does list the 39 countries. Importantly, there are distinctions between these different lists. So the full travel ban list are countries that represent a particular risk, quote unquote, depending on one's definition, particular risk to the United States, whether that means a security risk or a very high risk of overstay on a visa or unlawful immigration. And for those countries, there are no non-immigrant visa issuances available right now. That is to say, you can't get a B1, B2 or an H1B or a student visa or any of these other visas, or an immigrant visa. You can't do a green card processing if you're from one of these countries. The partial list, the list of countries with a partial ban, sounds better, but for our purposes, they're pretty much in the same boat because those countries are able to obtain, individuals from those countries are able to obtain most visa categories, but not the B1, B2 visitor or student visas. And so if you're from one of those countries like Venezuela or Nigeria or Cote d'Ivoire, you're not going to be able to get a B1, B2 visa from those countries. There are a couple of caveats here. One, and most importantly, is that officers can issue you a visa. You can schedule an appointment if you hold another nationality. So simply holding the nationality from Venezuela or one of the other countries doesn't prevent you from getting a visa on another country's passport. So if you have a passport from another country, whether it's in the EU or it's another country in Mercosur, you can still apply for the visa and hopefully get it on time in that other passport. So in addition to those, I have to say, sort of hearkening back to earlier in the conversation, that honestly, more people are going to be affected by the presumption of immigrant intent. I think we're going to see a lot more people refuse visas under 214B for failing to demonstrate strong ties to their home country than people who will be impacted by the travel bans, if I'm perfectly honest. Some countries have a very high refusal rate for non-immigrant visitor visas, and applicants there just really do face a hard time getting the visa issued. And so probably the people with the greatest concerns about being able to get the visa and attend the World Cup are those who simply don't meet the requirements for eligibility. One other one that I want to put in here, because I couldn't see where else in our conversation I could work this in, but there is a category of people who previously might not have had to be too concerned about getting the visa, but under the current regulations, they do. And that's people with a previous arrest. And this is an arrest in the United States or elsewhere, and regardless of what the ultimate outcome was from that arrest. In other words, even if you hadn't been charged or convicted of any particular crime, consular officers around the world now are looking very, very closely at any applicant who was previously arrested anywhere at any time. So my best advice to anybody who finds himself with that sort of a situation is come to the interview prepared to talk about it, to explain what happened, and come documented. Bring everything that you can with respect to where it happened, what was the circumstance of the arrest, what was the ultimate outcome and disposition of it, so you can demonstrate to an officer, yes, I got a DUI, or yes, I was arrested for jaywalking in Manhattan, whatever it might be, that you can demonstrate to them that you're still eligible for the visa. And so just please take that to heart and come prepared.
So we've talked a lot, Brian, in our podcast series about this being the largest World Cup ever. 48 teams. It's an increase of 16 teams, 50% bigger than any World Cup before it. And along with that comes obviously participation from more countries, and in particular more countries that might have some of these difficulties you've been mentioning. So for example, what about fans from places like Haiti, Iran, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire? These are all qualified countries. Many of them qualified prior, but not often all at the same time. So what do you foresee for people from countries like those who just want to see their national team in a World Cup?
Hopefully they have good television coverage. Look, I mean, I'm sorry to be very flip about this. I really am. It's an incredibly unfortunate situation. The State Department has made special exemptions for the teams, the players, the executives, and certain government officials from the countries in the World Cup themselves. Okay, and so there's no fear that the team from Haiti or the team from Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire will be able to actually go to the World Cup, but they have not made any exemptions for World Cup ticket holders, okay, or for fans. And so unfortunately, it means they're not going to be able to get a visa to come. Now, anybody from those locations who has a valid visa can still come. Okay, they may face additional scrutiny at the port of entry, etc. But the visa itself is supposed to be valid, even in light of all of the additional new travel restrictions. So I guess that's the one sort of hopeful note that we can make here is that if you do have a valid visa, you should be able to attend, and if you don't, honestly, it's going to be very, very difficult. You can still apply, hope rings eternal, right? And you can apply, but the odds are that you're not going to get the visa if you hold a passport only from one of those affected countries.
Brian, so we've talked about ESTA, we've talked about the B1, B2 for fans. What else, other information or guidance would you provide for fans versus journalists versus sponsors, vendors, all the different roles that might be coming here to be a part of the World Cup?
I mean, honestly, with respect to things like media and vendors and things like that, the rules really haven't changed. And most of those visa categories really don't require something like a FIFA pass or an accelerated appointment schedule. But it is important to understand when you do need to get a specialized visa to come. Most people, obviously, the vast majority of people applying for visas for the World Cup will be coming as visitors or spectators or fans. And so the B1, B2 visa is perfectly adequate for them. Now, there are some other niche categories like for media and journalists um, who are coming to cover the events of the World Cup. There are some distinctions between filmmakers and artists that are coming for creating entertaining media, right, versus those who are coming to document and or broadcast events from the World Cup itself. Now, what's good to know is that the fairly rigid sort of restrictions or divisions between these various visas have eased somewhat in light of modern media tools and outlets, right? So previously, the I visa, which is for media specialists and journalists, had been limited to television journalists or documentary filmmakers and their crews, and so it was fairly restrictive. These days, thanks to the proliferation of social media content creators, influencers, many of those individuals will now qualify for the I visa, which permits them to come in and carry out their trade, right? To make videos, make content about the World Cup, as long as their stated intent is to create content that is informative about the World Cup itself and not merely for entertainment purposes. It can be entertaining, don't get me wrong. Most of the content creators and social media influencers are looking for an entertainment quotient, certainly. But as long as they can demonstrate that they're going to be providing, in addition, informational sort of updates about the event itself, that should qualify them for the I visa. If they enter on a B1, B2, and they do their work as a journalist, even if it's as a content creator for social media, they may be running afoul of U.S. immigration admissions if they do that for a living. All right. So if you're a professional media personality or influencer or content creator, you really should try to get that I visa to come in because it gives a lot more flexibility to work and provide that content.
Perfect. Any other special considerations for this group, especially considering social media vetting?
Um, I mean, not really. I feel like I beat to death sort of the idea of proving your ties to your home country. So let me move off of that for a second. We already talked about one of the other sort of special considerations, which is the arrests review that are being conducted now. You mentioned the social media vetting, which has gotten a lot of press over the last year. We've seen it implemented specifically for students last summer. And as of December, we saw the requirement for social media vetting go into place for H-1B and H-4 visa applicants. As of today, there is no requirement for consular officers to do a social media review for B1, B2 applicants. That's not to say that they won't do it, but they're not required to do so. So all I would say is, I mean, look, the DS-160 application form has included spaces for disclosing social media account information for years now, and it's never really been utilized until now. So when somebody's getting ready to apply for a visa, they do need to disclose some or all of their social media accounts in the DS-160 form. And when they go to their interview, the officer may ask them to make their accounts public so they can do a social media review. It's unlikely to happen, if I'm being honest. Most officers have enough on their plate already. They're taking a lot of time with doing social media reviews for students and H-1Bs, and most of them are not going to seek this information. But be prepared for it if they do, and just roll with it, go with it, and grant them that access.
Okay. Okay, understood, Brian. So, changing a little bit of topic and on a more intimidating sounding process, visa bonds, what are they, Brian? Who do they apply to?
Okay, so this new policy is a direct response to countries that have high immigration overstay rates, and that's it. And it's an effort by the administration to give them an extra incentive to go back to their home countries, right? So in addition to all the things we talked about, a job, a family, et cetera, the other thing is, well, you just paid us $15,000 for this visa. That's a pretty good motivation to go back, right? And so that's sort of the idea behind the visa bonds. It says that individuals who are applying for visitor visas, B1, B2s, will be required to put up a certain amount of money in order to have the visa issued. There's a very specific protocol that has to be followed. The officer will set the amount of the bond. They're limited to setting it at $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000, with the assumption that most people will be in the middle at the $10,000 range, and only individuals who present a higher risk of immigration will be in the $15,000 range. Once you've gone through that protocol of making the fee payment and everything, then the officer can issue the visa. Again, even more strict limitations on these issuances. If somebody's issued under a visa bond payment, the visa is eligible for one entry, 30 days. That's it, 30 days. And so after they've been in the U.S. for 30 days, they got to go back. And so once you've gone back to your home country and your departure has been recorded in the I-94 travel history system, then the State Department is automatically notified that you've complied with the terms of the bond, and they will refund the money. Okay. There's a couple of things I do want to point out here, because there have been some misconception, I think, around the idea of the bond. Maybe this is mostly Americans who've made this misinterpretation, but unlike a bail bond for jail, there are not, to the best of my knowledge, bondsmen around the world to whom you can make a small payment and then they put in the big payment. Yes, other parties can do the payment for you. So if you apply for the visa and your parents say we can cover the cost of the bond, then that's fine. They can make the payment. But to the best of my knowledge, there isn't a system now where you can say, hey, Alfredo's bail bonds, I'm going to put down 10% of this bond, you pay the rest. That's not a thing. The whole amount has to be paid on the applicant's behalf before the visa can be issued. Okay. So I think that's the important thing to note.
So we've covered a lot today. And typically what we do, Brian, and thank you, by the way, typically what we do is we end with a lightning round. So how about we start?
Okay.
So true or false? ESTA approved equals guaranteed entry to the United States for the World Cup.
No, false. CBP officers at the port of entry still have the obligation and the right to do an interview and determine whether or not you are eligible to enter the U.S., either based on your demographic, your profile, your whatever, your history, your travel history, etc. They still have the right to deny you entry.
True or false? FIFA pass equals guaranteed visa appointment and approval.
Asked and answered, my friend. We did that one already. The FIFA pass doesn't guarantee you an appointment or an approval.
Another one, I think we covered this as well, but for the benefit of our viewers, quick synopsis: visitor visa equals permission to work. True or false?
It depends. It depends.
I like that answer.
A visitor visa, a B1, B2 visa, half of that is B1, which means business, which means you can come to the FIFA, to the World Cup, and if your employer says, hey, can you come to a meeting in New York while you're here? Sure, why not? So you can conduct business activities, you can go to meetings, you can meet with clients. If you've got a client that has tickets to the World Cup or you're going to go with them, Great. That's all great. You can conduct business, but you're not allowed to work for compensation in the United States. So be careful about the activities you engage in, as long as it remains sort of casual, or like meetings and trainings and things like that. You should be good to go. But otherwise, don't sign a new employment contract with somebody, or you may get in trouble.
I guess I should have asked a true, false, or it depends. Brian,
Yeah.
Before I ask you one last question, I want to give you the opportunity to provide any final advice you may have for fans wanting to come, anyone associated with the tournament, anything like that. It's your opportunity to give a last bit of final and prudent advice to our audience.
I mean, like I said at the outset, right? Don't make any assumptions about your ability to get a visa. Don't make any assumptions about getting into the United States. But really, above all, I just want to emphasize, in the States, take care to behave yourself. That's as simple as I can put it. This is not currently an environment where somebody wants to get themselves in trouble when they're in the United States on a visitor visa. And so, I know that there are certain fan demographics out there that may not want to hear this, but be on your best behavior, I think, is probably the best way that I can put it, which may be anathema to some World Cup fans, but it's the simple reality these days, right? And without going into too fine of detail on this, obviously, the point is, be on your best behavior, be aware of surroundings, just be aware of yourself and your presence, and where you are the whole time you're here. And, to the extent possible, try to have some fun.
And as promised, I have one last question for you, which we ask all of our guests rather. So this beautiful replica here is what teams are all playing for. Now, I'm not making assumptions as to your soccer fandom. However, who do you think will win the World Cup this summer?
Oh, man. I have to confess, you guys shared questions with me in advance, and I didn't even look at this one. I'm going to go with my gut, though. My family, we tend to be fans of France, PSG, and I'm going to go with my gut and say that this year they're going to overcome that last step and they're going to get it. Hopefully,
Fair
without
answer.
without the agonizing drama of penalty shots.
Fair answer. And I think you're one of the few ones who actually said France. So thank you for that. And to all our viewers and listeners.
What's the consensus?
We've had many. We've had Holland. We've had Brazil. We've had Argentina.
Spain.
We've had Spain. I think someone said England. We've had a diverse number of our amount of guests on. So, and I do want to thank you very much, and to our audience, I hope you've all found this very enlightening and informative and helpful. Let's make sure that we're hashtagging Fragomen FC to keep the conversation going. Brian, on behalf of Sergio and Jake, thank you so much. This has been a really great episode, and hopefully, like I said, it's helpful to our audience. So thank you, and we'll talk to you all soon.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brian.